I welcome everyone to this very important seminar on judicial appointments. At a critical time when the higher judiciary and the role that it is supposed to play under our constitution has become exceedingly important. We know that the higher judiciary was created by the constitution to ensure the protection of the constitution itself, protection of democracy, protection of fundamental rights of citizens. And in the current climate where a lot of these values are threatened, the judiciary, the higher judiciary, is supposed to and expected to play an even more critical and important role. And it is in this context that appointments to the higher judiciary become exceedingly important, and we have been seeing in the recent past that this government has been stalling many appointments which have been recommended by the collegium. As you all know, the law laid down by the Supreme Court about judicial appointments is that the persons, the judges will be selected by the collegium of senior judges of the Supreme Court, and the government can only return the matter back to the collegium once if they have some objection. Thereafter, if it is unanimously reiterated, those persons have to be appointed. But what we have been seeing is that appointments are being stalled because the government doesn't respond to the recommendations. Even if it responds after some time and the recommendations are unanimously reiterated, often the appointments are not made, the notifications are not issued. And also there is segregation of the recommendations so that people who were supposed to be senior are made junior in that process, who were supposed to be senior according to the recommendations of the collegium. There is also a concerted attack on the collegium system by the government and its cohorts, and this attack has got some takers among the public, and the takers are also there because even the collegium system has had its problems, still has problems which need to be rectified. And there is, of course, the larger debate about what can be the best and ideal system. So we have we have organized a seminar in order to discuss all these three issues. So the first session is about how the government is stonewalling recommendations of the collegium. The second session is about how the collegium system can be improved by making it more transparent and better suited for recommending the right judges and avoiding the kind of nepotism that one sometimes sees in collegium selections. And the third session is about what should be and could be the best system or the best process for selecting judges in this country. And thereafter, there is a last session on questions that people might have, discussion, and a resolution. We have a very, very impressive galaxy of speakers for this seminar, the kind that I have never seen assembled before in one seminar relating to the judiciary. We have retired chief justices, retired judges of the Supreme Court and the High Court. We have vice chancellors of various some of the best law universities. We have professors, we have judicial activists. Some of the best people in the country are going to be speaking in this seminar, and therefore you are in for something which has not been seen for a very, very long time in this country. So without more ado, let me introduce the moderators for the session. So we have Cheryl D'Souza, who is an advocate and the secretary for the campaign for judicial accountability and reforms, who will be moderating or not moderating, who would be anchoring the first session. And thereafter, for the second session, which is on a transparent and accountable collegium, we have Alok Prasanna, who is the co-founder of Vidhi Legal Center of Legal Policy, who will be anchoring it. And for the third session, the anchor will be Prasanna S., who is an advocate, along with Amrita Jori, who is an RTI activist. So let me invite Cheryl to introduce the speakers for the first session and invite them. So we have heard since the morning the various problems with the present system of appointments. We've heard how the government is interfering with the recommendations of the collegium. We have also heard about how even the collegium has failed in different ways. In firstly, making recommendations of people like Victoria Gowri, not following through with its recommendations for appointment of Justice Akhil Qureshi or Jayant Patel, etc., transferring Justice Tahir Rahmani, etc. So, we have seen that there is nepotism also in the selections by the collegium, and therefore the fact is that though the collegium system is better than the government making the selections or the government directly interfering with selections, because the collegium at least leads to slightly more independent judges being appointed, but it is far from perfect, and therefore we do need substantial improvements. Improvements can be made, as have been suggested, to the collegium system as well. But if we have to think of the best possible system for making judicial appointments, we have to keep in mind the following principles. One, there should be a proper and detailed criteria for selecting judges. I've been saying this for many years now that if you ask any Chief Justice, today one of the Chief Justices was here, as to what do they look for when they select judges, they will say they look at competence and they look at integrity. Competence, they say, we know because these lawyers are practicing before us or from the judgments of the judges in the high courts, if they are being considered for selection to the Supreme Court, we can see, evaluate competence on the basis of that. And they say integrity, well, we rely to some extent on the IB report or any other information that we may get from here and there about the integrity of the person. But the first question is, are these two enough to select judges? For example, I'll just give you 2 or 3 examples. What about judicial temperament? A person may be very competent. A person may also have integrity, but he may have no judicial temperament. Justice Karpyu is a very good example of that. He had integrity, he had competence, he was certainly competent, but he had zero judicial temperament. He had no judicial temperament whatsoever. So, that's certainly an aspect which has to be considered when appointing a judge. What about common sense? Now, common sense is the most important quality for a judge. A judge may be a person, a lawyer may be highly intelligent and therefore may appear to be very competent, but he may lack common sense. What about commitment to the principles of the Constitution? Again, a judge may be highly competent. He may also be a man of integrity, but he may believe, as Professor Mohan Gopal pointed out, he may believe that yes, the Hindu dharma or the Hindu Rashtra is what is required. So therefore, he doesn't then adhere to the principles enshrined in the constitution. Why do you not? What about his understanding of and sensitivity towards the social reality of the country? Is that also not an important quality to be seen in a judge? There are so many important complex cases which public interest cases which come before judges, which need judges who have some understanding and some sensitivity to the social reality of the country. Now, in England, there is a Judicial Appointments Commission which has evolved a criteria which has 15 ingredients. Here we just, and how do we evaluate competence or integrity? There is not even a proper system for evaluating competence or integrity. IB report is absolutely useless. How can you rely upon an IB report for evaluating the integrity of a person and you don't even put across the material that the IB gives you to that person? Well, the IB is saying that you are a boozer or you are an alcoholic. Now, what do you have to say? If they had put this thing to that judge, of course, I mean, I don't want to say much about that particular judge, but if they had put that to that judge, he would have at least said that, look, I am not an alcoholic, I have not touched a drop of alcohol in my life. So, how do you at all rely upon some intelligence report of the IB which says things without providing the evidence to back it up? Unless there is absolute concrete evidence, it's just hearsay. I mean, IB or any other organization is just hearsay. So you don't have a proper system of evaluating people, even on the minimal criteria of integrity and competence that you have laid down. How do you evaluate competence? You say, well, I mean, this. How does the Supreme Court Collegium evaluate the competence of some High Court judges who are being recommended? On what basis? Ultimately, the decision is of the Supreme Court Collegium. They may know nothing at all, and we know that there are lots of prejudices, etc., which operate, and therefore, the Collegium, there are consulting judges. Suppose there is no consulting judge of a particular High Court, what does the Collegium do? And even if there is a consulting judge, that consulting judge may have his own prejudices, etc., his own biases and prejudices. So this is certainly not a satisfactory system for judging the most competent people to be selected for appointment of judges. And one of the reasons why this is not satisfactory is because judges of the collegium are very, very busy sitting judges. They have they have their hands overfull with their judicial work. They have hardly any time to devote to a proper evaluation of candidates. Justice Indira Banerjee pointed out that we must look at all eligible candidates, or at least those who have been recommended by even one judge from anywhere. One judge, one sitting judge, or some president of the Bar Association, that would make a very large field of eligibility. Every year, more than 100 judges of the High Courts and the Supreme Court need to be appointed. In order to select 100 judges, you need to evaluate at least 1,000 people. And 1,000 people on a detailed and elaborate criteria, and you must have a proper system of evaluating them. This job certainly cannot be done by sitting judges or by the law minister. It can only be done by a full-time body. We have been saying for the last 20 years continuously that we need a full-time Judicial Appointments Commission, not an ex officio body, and this Judicial Appointments Commission must be completely independent of the government. Of course, it should have some retired judges, It should have some jurists or some good academics, etc. And it can also have some other uh, public intellectuals, etc. Because even if they have no experience of the judiciary directly, meaning that even if they have, if there is a proper criteria laid down, if there is a proper search committee or a secretariat which puts together all the relevant material on all the eligible people, suppose there are 1,000, 2,000 eligible people, as Justice Indira Banerjee pointed out, every information which is relevant to those candidates must go into that database, must go into that bank, and all that must be available to that selection committee. And thereafter, they can also interview them, and thereafter, that selection should be made. So, therefore, I have always been of the view that there has to be a full-time body for this selection. Secondly, uh, transparency. Now, uh, Anjali has pointed out that the Supreme Court, you see, the Supreme Court was the first institution to say, first in 1974 in Indira Gandhi versus Raj Narayan, when the issue was the disclosure of the Blue Book, which contained security instructions of the Prime Minister in her election case. Now, in that case, the Supreme Court said that the people are the masters of the country in a democracy, and the masters have every right to know everything that their public servants are doing in every detail. And after that, in case after case, S.P. Gupta, ADR, where the Supreme Court said that candidates in contesting elections have to disclose information about their assets and liabilities, about their criminal record, etc. In PUCL thereafter, where they struck down a law which tried to overrule it. Case after case after case after case, the Supreme Court, without even a right to information law, has said that it's axiomatic that in a democracy which is governed by the rule of law and in a republic where citizens have the right to free speech, the citizens have every right to know everything about what public authorities are doing, barring some exemptions which have been elaborately laid down in the Right to Information Act. And that is why the Supreme Court itself, in the selection of Chief Information Commissioners, said what Anjali pointed out, that you have to lay down a criteria for selection, make it public. You have to have a search committee, you have to have a list of eligible candidates, make all that public. So the whole process of selection, including the reason why you have selected certain people, should be laid down. And that's what even the collegium said once, that we will now maintain minutes of selection, we will now give reasons for selecting certain people, and we will make it public. And for a short while they did. But then they reversed their own decision. So the result is now that only some cursory information is given. I mean, sometimes detailed information is given. For example, when they recently reiterated the selection of Saurabh Kirpal and another person, they gave very elaborate reasons as to what the government's objection was, what the IG's objection was, and why they overruled that objection. But sometimes no information is given. So as a matter of general rule, all these things must be given out. Number one, the candidates, the eligible candidates who are in the zone of consideration, the minutes of the selection committee, the list of shortlisted candidates, so that, you see, the people also need to be given an opportunity, just as the government is given an opportunity to say what it wants to say about the persons who are being recommended for selection, the people of this country also need to be given an opportunity. Just as Lokar pointed out that lawyers by and large come to know whose names have been recommended by the High Court Collegium. But only lawyers come to know. Sometimes other people don't come to know. Sometimes even the lawyers don't come to know. Sometimes when we come to know, as we did recently in the case of one particular recommendee of the High Court, we discovered things which were flabbergasting. And we submitted a detailed representation to the collegium, pointing out that this man is utterly dishonest. But unfortunately, he still came to be appointed. That also speaks volumes about the manner in which the collegium is functioning. So therefore, all these things need to be put out. The basis for the selection, the minutes of the selection committee meetings, the short list, of course, well before the selection is made. So with fair degree of transparency, we expect that the collegium will also function better. But even for the collegium to function better, they need to lay down a better, more detailed criteria and make it public as to what are they looking for when they are selecting candidates. And they need to also put out how they go about judging people on this criteria. So these are just a few things that I had to suggest. Thank you very much.
To receive instant updates on all videos from The Wire, click the subscribe button and hit the bell icon. Pay to support independent journalism. Click the link in the description and choose the amount you want to pay.